In this video, I'll show you February 5th, 2024, Officer Crawford and Officer Abel of the Waite Park Police Department were on patrol when they noticed an open garage door at a local upholstery business in Waite Park, Minnesota. The door was open because Hunter Clems, the brother of the shop owner, was inside working on his car, which had broken down and could not be driven home until it was fixed. The encounter that followed was captured on Officer Crawford's body camera.
Police department! Come to the door!
Officer Crawford knocks on the door of the business and tells Mr. Clems to, quote, "come to the door." As we have covered in previous episodes of ATA, under the so-called knock-and-talk doctrine, police officers are legally permitted under the Fourth Amendment to go to private property, knock on the door, speak with whoever answers the door, and try to obtain consent to search the premises, even without any reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. This is because, in general, any member of the public can knock on a door to attempt to engage in a consensual conversation with whoever answers the door. Without violating a reasonable expectation of privacy, during a standard knock and talk, the individual inside the property can choose not to answer the door, and the officers will then need to leave the property. However, when officers take actions that would lead a reasonable person to believe that they must open the door, a consensual knock and talk can be transformed to a Fourth Amendment search and seizure. As the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, which has jurisdiction over Minnesota, explained in the 2006 case of U.S. v. Poe, quote, "Although a person who opens a door in response to a simple knock by officers knowingly exposes to the public that which can be seen through the door. We have held that one who does so in response to a demand under color of authority does not open the door voluntarily." In the Poe case, an individual opened the door only after officers knocked persistently for 10 minutes and commanded him to open the door. The court determined that because, quote, "a reasonable person would have concluded that he had no choice but to acquiesce and open the door," the encounter was not a consensual knock and talk, but rather a Fourth Amendment search that must be supported by probable cause. Now, in this situation, Officer Crawford did not simply knock on the door, but he announced that he was the police and ordered Mr. Clems to answer. Based on these facts, Mr. Clems would have a strong argument that Officer Crawford's actions implicated the Fourth Amendment, and that he did not open the door consensually.
Action, police? Wouldn't call myself police if I wasn't them.
What's up? Oh, sorry. I thought you were one of my buddies fucking with me. I'm sorry.
No, man. I came by, saw the garage open. It's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh.
Trying to figure out what's going on.
I'm working on my car. I can't leave until I get it fixed.
Okay.
You scared the shit out of me.
No worries.
I was over there drilling, so yeah.
Is it just you here?
Yeah, it's just me.
Okay. You have permission to be here, or is this your shop, or?
Yeah, I have permission to be here.
Okay, is it your shop?
No,
Or
it's
you
my,
work?
it's my buddy's shop. But
It's your buddy's shop?
But I work here, and I'm allowed here. I have a key here, so.
Okay.
I'm doing the transmission on my, something on the transmission on my car, so
Okay.
I'm not allowed to, can't really leave.
I gotcha. I gotcha. You got your ID on your butt?
No, I didn't commit a crime.
Listen here, man. What I'm saying is, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. There's an open door. You're inside. I'm asking for your ID. Just let my bosses know, my boss, who I'm talking to. You're not in trouble.
You don't need to ID me.
Let's
Exactly,
not,
I'm not in trouble.
Hey, let's not do this.
So here's
the point?
Here's part. I'm assuming you work here, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's say you don't. What? No, just
You
hold
guys
on.
are going to give me the whole
No,
rundown and then try to give me the ID
No,
myself for no reason because I didn't commit a crime. I'm inside of
It's
private
more than
property.
just a crime, man. You work here, right? Let's say we find this door open, no one in here, or it turns out it's burglarized, and I have to contact someone.
But it's not. I'm not committing a crime. You don't need my ID.
Cool.
The officers asked Mr. Clems to identify himself, and Mr. Clems refuses. Now, although Minnesota has not passed a so-called stop and identify statute requiring citizens to identify themselves to law enforcement, an individual who refuses to identify themselves during a lawful Terry stop can potentially be convicted of violating the state obstruction statute. Section 609.50 of the Minnesota statutes criminalizes obstructing, resisting, or interfering with a peace officer while they are engaged in the performance of official duties, and courts have found a refusal to identify. To constitute obstruction under certain circumstances, we have discussed the details of identification requirements in Minnesota at further length than a previous episode of ATA, and I've included a link to this episode in the description down below. However, for this encounter, it is essential to note that as the Supreme Court held in the 1979 case of Brown v. Texas, individuals cannot be criminally punished for refusing to identify themselves when the officer demanding identification does not have reasonable suspicion to believe that they are involved in criminal conduct in this situation, the only base. ISIS for Officer Crawford's suspicion is that Mr. Clems was inside a private business after hours. There were no signs of forced entry and no signs of any sort of criminal activity occurring inside the business. Mr. Clems provided a reasonable explanation for his presence at the business that was consistent with the location, and the vehicle he was working on was clearly visible. The business owner had not reported an intruder at the property, and Officer Crawford had not received any calls reporting a break-in or unauthorized individual at the business. Accordingly, it seems unlikely that a court would determine that. Officer Crawford had the reasonable suspicion necessary to require Mr. Clems to identify himself.
Wait.
That's how it is.
Oh, is that how it is?
Yeah, it is.
Charles David
I have
Robert,
rights.
802. It's not about rights, man. It's about you're in a
I'm
shop.
not committing a crime.
We don't know that.
Well,
Or we call the owner. We figure out who you are.
so what's the crime? Suspicion?
Huh?
Since when is suspicion a crime? Or
Well,
when
say-
is we don't know that a crime?
What we're doing is we're going to make
You
it a
guys
bigger
are
thing than it needs to be.
disgusting. Get out of here. Look at my freaking license plate number. God.
Absolutely.
You guys are disgusting. Get out of here.
Officer Crawford looks at the license plate on Mr. Clem's vehicle and calls the number into dispatch. Courts have generally concluded that the Fourth Amendment does not require officers to have any level of suspicion to look at a license plate number and run a search for the number in a police database. As the Supreme Court explained in the 1986 case of New York versus Class Quote, the state's intrusion into a particular area, whether in an automobile or elsewhere, cannot result in a Fourth Amendment violation unless the area is one in which there is a constitutionally protected, reasonable expectation of privacy. In the 2002 case of U.S. versus Sparks, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals held that, quote, no person possesses a privacy interest in their license plates. As such, officers can run tags of a vehicle in plain view without implicating the Fourth Amendment. However, officers cannot violate the Fourth Amendment in order to put themselves in a position to observe the license plate. Since, as we discussed earlier in this episode, Officer Crawford may have violated the Fourth Amendment by ordering Mr. Clems to open the door, it is therefore possible that a court would conclude that Officer Crawford also violated the Fourth Amendment by running Mr. Clems' tags.
You don't need my ID.
Well, we're going to go down a road we don't really need to go down, man.
God.
Yeah.
Why do I need my name in your system any more than it has to be?
It's just you work here. Let's just make sure that you do.
How are you going to prove that I do?
Huh?
How are you going to prove that I do?
Well, I can always call the business owner in the
have
morning.
fun. He's
Right?
not going to answer because he's sleeping.
Okay, I can call the business owner in the morning.
Okay.
I can give him your name,
Okay.
and he says, "Oh yeah, he works here. No problem."
What's
And
the
we're
point
done.
of that? You ain't going to call it in because there's nothing going on.
But then, say you don't work here, right?
He's going to call it in that his shop's been with.
Yep, and then
So
I know
right away in the morning.
and then I know who was here, and I can
I don't
add
have
him.
to help you with your investigation.
Perfect.
It's on
Perfect.
my rights.
Okay. Well, I'm going to check and make sure. Watch out.
But no, I don't know. I don't
touch
get.
me.
I don't
Back
give you
up.
consent. I don't give you consent.
This isn't your
How
personal
how
property.
not?
Move.
What? How? You don't have the right to do this.
I do.
No, you don't. What are you going to check for, dude?
Who else is here? Just you?
Nobody.
Okay.
Dude, you don't have the right to do this. Get out of here.
It's not your personal property. I'm going to make sure nothing looks burglarized in here.
Oh my God. You don't have the right to do this.
I absolutely do, sir.
Nothing is burglarized.
Okay.
Get out of here. I did not give you permission to be in here.
Well, you don't have to give me permission.
Yes, I do. You can't just come into a private property.
Mr. Clemson's repeated objections, Officer Crawford searches the business premises. As the Supreme Court explained in the 1967 case of Camara versus Municipal Court, quote, except in certain carefully defined classes of cases, a search of private property without proper consent is unreasonable unless it has been authorized by a valid search warrant. Now, while the language of the Fourth Amendment only mentions, quote, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, the Supreme Court has repeatedly held that business premises are protected by the Fourth Amendment. For instance, in the 1967 case of C versus City of Seattle, the Supreme Court determined that, quote, the businessman, like the occupant of a residence, has a constitutional right to go about his business free from unreasonable official entries upon his private commercial property, and that therefore, now quoting again, the basic component of a reasonable search under the Fourth Amendment, that it not be enforced without a suitable warrant procedure, is applicable to business as well as to residential premises. It is important to note that as the Supreme Court summarized in the 1987 case of New York versus Berger, quote, the Court long has recognized that the Fourth Amendment's prohibition on unreasonable searches and seizures is applicable to commercial premises as well as to private homes. An owner or operator of a business thus has an expectation of privacy in commercial property, which society is prepared to consider to be reasonable. An expectation of privacy in commercial premises, however, is different from and indeed less than a similar expectation in an individual's home. Nonetheless, much of the case law involving the so-called reduced expectation of privacy in business premises applies to administrative inspections designed to enforce regulatory statutes, not traditional police searches conducted for the gathering of criminal evidence. And since Officer Crawford was engaged in a criminal investigation and not an administrative inspection when he entered the business premises, which at the time were not open to the public, it is likely that a court would conclude that his search violated the Fourth Amendment unless he had so-called exigent circumstances to enter the property without a warrant. The Supreme Court cautioned in the 1984 case of Welsh versus Wisconsin that, quote, exceptions to the warrant requirement are few in number and carefully delineated, and that the police bear a heavy burden when attempting to demonstrate an urgent need that might justify warrantless searches. The court then noted that it had only recognized a few such emergency conditions, such as the hot pursuit of a fleeing felon, the potential destruction of evidence, and an ongoing fire. Similarly, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals stated in the 2008 case of U.S. versus Williams, quote, exigent circumstances are present where lives are threatened, a suspect's escape is imminent, or evidence is about to be destroyed. And in the Poe case we discussed earlier in this episode, the Eighth Circuit noted that, quote, a legitimate concern for officer safety or the safety of others may constitute an exigent circumstance, and a warrantless entry into a residence may be justified if an officer has a reasonable fear of harm. Now, although there was clearly no ongoing emergency or a threat to anyone's safety, Officer Crawford could potentially argue that he was concerned that Mr. Clems could destroy some sort of evidence inside the premises. However, as the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals explained in the 1990 case of U.S. versus Munoz, quote, in addition to showing exigent circumstances, the government must show that the officer had probable cause to search the apartment. And as we mentioned earlier in this episode, it is doubtful that Officer Crawford even had reasonable suspicion, let alone probable cause. And as such, it is likely that a court would determine that the search of the business violated the Fourth Amendment.
Get out of here.
Copy. What was that name again?
You can't just come into here for no reason. I didn't commit a crime.
Say it again.
I didn't commit a crime, so you can get out of here now.
10-4. Hunter?
Yeah.
Easy enough.
Yeah.
Have a good
cool.
night.
Thanks for violating my rights.
It's not your rights. It's
Yes, it
private
is. It's my rights. This is private property. You
It
can't
is
just
a
walk
private
in.
business at 2 o'clock in the morning. You're in
Private
here,
business.
and
You
and
get that?
Will not,
Private
and you will not
business.
identify yourself.
Private
I don't
business.
know who
I
you
don't
are.
have to. I didn't commit a crime.
You're in a private business
So?
at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly.
Past the
2
hours
o'clock
of
in the
closing.
morning does not matter.
Past the hours of
I'm
closing.
over 18.
That's
Past the
fine.
hours of closing. This
Past
is
the
a private
hours of
business.
closing. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. The garage is open. You're inside. The business has been closed, I'm assuming, since about 5, 6 o'clock.
So what does that tell you? The garage
That
is
it
open.
could possibly be burglarized. Yeah, you could be in here doing something you're not supposed to. That
Because
you may not
burglarized-
have permission to
Why
be
would I
in
leave
there.
that open
Hold on,
if I was
hold on.
burglarizing something?
Hold on, I don't know that. But what I can do is now I can confirm that this person, this vehicle was inside of this business, and if the owner calls in tomorrow and says, this person was in here and you didn't have permission to be, then I know who I can come and talk to first. You understand?
Yeah,
Do you have
but
any
you're still
questions
violating
about
my rights.
It's not
I
your
don't
rights.
have to tell you that.
Well, you do.
No, I really don't.
You do.
No,
And we can make it a bigger deal than
I could
it
have
needs
just
to be.
not answered the door.
You could have, and then I would have went in underneath there.
Then you would have broke into a business.
That's not breaking in. I'm the police. I'm in charge to make sure
You don't
the
have
crime-
rights. I told you could not come in here.
Yep, and
You don't have rights to come in here.
Well, you're not identifying yourself. A business has been
I don't
closed
have
for
to.
hours.
I don't have to.
Like I said, I'm not.
I don't
gonna
have to
explain
help
it
you
again.
in your investigation, dude. So you can go into anybody's house. If anybody's house has
This is not a
ground
house,
floor-
sir. This
Dude,
is
it's a private it's a
business.
private property. No, it's a private property.
business.
Does it matter?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
private property. You
You're
can leave
a-
now. You can leave.
Like I said,
You can leave.
Did I explain my point?
No.
You have any questions about it?
Yeah, thanks for violating my rights.
It's not violating your rights.
Well, I don't have to let you in.
Yep,
So, and I don't have
you
to
don't
tell you
have
my
to
name.
let me in.
I don't have to
I
tell
don't
you my
need your
name
permission
either.
to let me in.
I don't have to tell you my name.
You
either.
refuse to identify
I don't
yourself.
have to help you with your
You refuse to identify yourself in a business that's been closed after
You
hours.
can shut
You have
that.
any questions
You can
about
shut
that?
that now.
I'll be contacting the owner. Make sure you have permission in the morning. Okay?
I'll talk.
Have a good night.
Have fun.
Mr. Clems's brother, who confirmed that Mr. Clems had permission to be in the garage. The next day, Mr. Clems went to the Waite Park Police Department to file a complaint and spoke with Officer Abel, who maintained that he and Officer Crawford did nothing wrong but provided Mr. Clems with the forms he needed to file a complaint. However, Mr. Clems told me in an email that when he returned the complaint forms, he spoke with a sergeant who told him that the officers were allowed to take the actions that they took. It is unknown whether Mr. Clems intends to pursue any legal action regarding this encounter. Overall, Officer Crawford and Officer Abel get an F for maintaining hostile and confrontational demeanors throughout the encounter, failing to take basic investigative steps before resorting to shows of authority, and likely violating the Fourth Amendment in the process. Although the fact that someone was inside the upholstery business late at night could potentially be suspicious, whether or not an officer has the reasonable suspicion necessary to detain and identify an individual is based on the totality of the circumstances. In this situation, the officers did not receive any calls regarding an unauthorized individual in the business, and there were no signs of forced entry. It also seems unlikely that an individual who was engaged in criminal activity inside the business would leave the garage door open to alert passers-by of their presence. Rather than contact the business owner first, or even go to the door to engage in a consensual knock and talk, the officers ordered Mr. Clems to open the door, demanded that he identify himself, and then search the property without consent or exigent circumstances. Counter demonstrates how officers can run afoul of the Fourth Amendment when they fail to make use of the many non-invasive investigative methods available to them, and instead immediately resort to unnecessary shows of authority. Mr. Clems gets an A for remaining relatively calm and composed throughout the interaction, refusing to identify himself when he was not legally obligated to do so, and attempting to challenge the officers as unconstitutional actions while avoiding physically interfering with them. Mr. Clems also did an excellent job in taking steps to pursue accountability after the encounter, in addition to voicing his disagreement throughout the encounter, and immediately, thank you very much for watching the video. Subscribe our channel for next video.